Anyway, at this point, what he was telling me is that they couldn't wait a half hour, whatever it takes, to allow the process for the people to die. They would pull them out, and after they cut their hair and pull out their gold teeth, they would put them on these gurneys. And some of these people were still breathing, but they were, of course, obviously out of it. So to put them in the crematorium, it wasn't fast enough because the next train is already waiting to be unloaded. So what they decided to do, down they had those 3 or 5 pits, fiery pits. They would take these bodies and put them onto these dump trucks, and then they would haul those excess bodies on the dump trucks to these fiery pits and dump them into these fiery pits. So I asked him, what about the yells, the screaming? I'm hearing yelling. And he says, He says, Jetsko, infants, they couldn't be bothered with some of them. They threw some of the infants right on top of the dead bodies or half-dead bodies onto those dump trucks, and they dumped them all into these fiery pits with the live children. This was a rude awakening to me. I just couldn't imagine what they were doing. Imagine, they have actually industrialized death. I understand there was a competition, I found out later on, between all these different death camps. They had to be self-sufficient. They had to be paying for themselves. In other words, the loot that they got out of these bodies and the hidden jewels and whatever they can get together was supposed to pay for killing those people and for this whole operation. Imagine, they were taking your hair and they were sending in by the tons to Germany to manufacture into fabric, to make clothes and mattresses out of it. They were taking the teeth to pay for the war machine. They were taking even the ashes and using them for fertilizer. They were taking all the clothes that you left there that was partially still in good condition or what, send it to Germany for the German people and for the soldiers to wear, and those that could not be, weren't too good, they recycle. They would recycle all the clothes and send it to Germany. That was hard to believe. But I found it out from this Stubenälteste. He told me the whole story. He wasn't exactly friendly to us, but he took a liking to me somehow because I spoke Polish. Most of those people were Hungarians. Can you stop?
Okay.
Okay.
Ready.
We were in Auschwitz for 2 weeks. Every day, every morning and evening, they would line us up on a pell, which means we had to be counted, but we had to stand in complete attention. And if for any reason somebody started to lean a little bit, or they didn't do exactly what they were told, they used to have a way that they would order you to remove your cap and put it back on. Mütze abnehmen. You had to pull it down while you're standing in attention. But you had to hit your hand on your side of your leg in one voice, one clap. If he heard more than one clap like this, somebody was too slow. And if you could find that somebody who was too slow, he would pull him out and kill him. Beat him to a pulp right in front of everybody. They were playing games with us. And why would they make us count? Count morning, count night. You couldn't escape any place. It's all electrified wires with dogs. You couldn't do anything. No, they kept counting. That was a way of selecting, weeding out the weak from the strong. In fact, after the war, I found out that in the women's section of Auschwitz, some of the women, when they stood on appeal, they would prick their fingers with needles to pull a little blood out of it and rub it into their faces so they shouldn't look so pale and weak. Because if they are too pale and too weak, they would select them and take them to the gas chambers. It was an unbelievable time. Thanks God we were only there for about two weeks approximately. And after that they loaded us in trucks and they took us to a labor camp, a whole group. What was the labor camp? It was a rock quarry. As they were dynamiting the mountain and boulders kept tumbling down, it was our job with sledgehammers to break down these big boulders into manageable pieces, put them in mining carts, run the mining carts down the hill to the grinding machines where they were making gravel out of it. Then push the mining cart back up the hill and the process would begin all over. It was very hard, back-breaking work with the sledgehammers. And you couldn't rest because they would hit you every time you rest. So I knew my uncle is not going to survive that. The kitchen chef, the head of the kitchen, slept in the same bunk where we slept, in the same barrack. I approached him and I said, look, if you can give my uncle a job in the kitchen, I will give you some diamonds. Diamonds? Yeah, some diamonds. And I took one shoe and I opened it up. There were diamonds. I said, they're yours. All I want is my uncle to have a good job in the kitchen. He took it. He gave my uncle a job in the kitchen. Now it was a little easier for both of us, all of us, because my uncle could eat in the kitchen while he was there. They were not allowed to walk out with food. They were searched. But there you can eat. Now he was getting his ration, so he would share his ration with his son and me. So it made it a little easier for us. But this chef kept coming back for more and more diamonds until finally they were all gone. But he still had a job in the kitchen. And I showed him, that's it, I don't have any more. Anyway, one day we come back from work and we all line up to be counted for appel. Before this is the routine. You line up in rows of 5, they count, and then they dismiss you. You go for your rations, you go into the barrack, you can shower, and you can go to sleep, right? That day we came back from work, and they're counting, and they're counting, and they're counting, without a stop. We couldn't figure out what's going on. When suddenly the commandant from the camp comes down with this Fräulein, a Fräulein on the side of his. He says, he's going to teach these Schweinhund a lesson, these pig dogs a lesson that we will never forget. What happened? 3 inmates escaped. And because of this, he's ordering his henchmen to pull out every 10th man in line, and he's to receive 25 lashes as a punishment for having the escapees escape. Well, as they're counting every 10th person in line, would be the front row, would be a 10th person, 5'10", 5'10". And I see my uncle was in the front, and I was behind him, my cousin was behind me. So I saw my uncle's going to be 10. I figured he's not going to survive 25 lashes. I switched with him. I pulled him behind me, and I took his place. Sure enough, I was picked. And I'm among one of these group of people of 10s that are picked for the lashes. They order his henchmen to bring down 2 bundles of stakes, hardwood stakes, 1 by 1 inch square, and about 2 or 2.5 feet long each. And then they order the other henchmen to bring down a sawhorse. You know what a sawhorse is?
Yeah.
Okay. Bring down a sawhorse. In case someone doesn't understand what a sawhorse looks like, it's like a tripod, 2x4s.
Right.
And you take 2 sawhorses, you can put a log of wood on top to cut it. Anyway, they brought down 1 sawhorse, and this is what they order us. Can I stand up?
Sure.
This is what they order us to do.
Okay.
You had to tiptoe on your toes. Your heel had to be off the ground. Your knee had to be placed into the opening of the sawhorse. The top 2x4, you bend over it, but your body is not allowed to touch the 2x4. So you had to be on your tiptoes, heel off the ground, bend over, and no part of your body can touch the sawhorse, while one person is holding your trousers like a drum tight. The other one is doing the hitting with those wooden stakes. And you're supposed to do your own counting. You have to count yourself. I'll sit down. If you miscount it, you have to start from 1 again. If your heels touch the ground, you have to start from 1 again. If any part of your body touched the wood of that sawhorse, you have to start from 1 again. Well, it was almost an impossible task. The first person going up, he does exactly what he's told, tiptoes, bends over, and they're starting to hit him, and he's counting, 1, 2, 3. Every time they hit him, you see a line of blood coming right through the trousers within seconds of each hit, because these stakes were so sharp, hardwood, and we were only wearing thin, like pajamas, striped pajamas, so you can see blood soaking through every hit. And this man finally lost count, and his feet started to shake, the heels touched the ground, and the commandant starts to yell at him, "Start all over again." Starts again and again and again. Finally he collapsed. He collapsed and he fell down to the ground. The commandant walks over to him, kicks him in his face with his boots, and he pulls out his revolver and he shoots him in the temple. Dead. His Fräulein walks over to him, she gives him a hug and a kiss like he just performed some kind of a heroic act of some sort. They were enjoying this. Now it's number 2 and I was number 3. There were a whole line of people waiting to be beaten. Number 2 comes up and he does the same thing, lines up. After a while, he loses count and his feet started to shake. He collapsed. He started to beg him. He says, "Please have mercy on me. Don't kill me." Then he says to him, Then get up, stand up and come and face me. The poor guy tried to stand up. His knees gave out from under him. He just folded under. He walks over, pulls out a revolver and shoots him. Now it was my turn. You have to remember, I was probably the youngest person in that camp. I was about 15 and a half at the time. I knew my life depended on this. So I did exactly what I was told. I tiptoed, put my knees in the opening, bent over the top without touching the 2x4 on top, and I started to count. 1, 2, 3, and one guy is holding my trousers, the other one is hitting him. And it turned out that the commandant didn't like the way he was hitting me. He thought he was hitting me too weak. So the commandant walks over to him, takes one of those stakes, and he hits it, breaks it over his head. He says, "You do it with full force, like this." He broke it right over his head. These were inmates, but this was their job. They had to listen. Anyway, he was hitting me so hard, and I felt the blood rushing right through me. But here I am already going to 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 25. I made it. The person who was holding my trousers tells me in Yiddish, he says, "Go over and thank him." So I stand up, blood running down my trousers, and I walk over to him and I salute him and I say, "Danke schön, Herr Kommandant." He puts his bloody hand on top of my shoulder, and he twists me around facing those people who are still to be beaten. And first I thought, what now? What is he going to do to me now? No, he made me an example. He says, "Now I told you it could be done. If you do it like this, Junge, you have nothing to worry about. You do it like this, young one, you have nothing to worry about." While this is going on, there's a commotion at the gate. They caught those 3 inmates, and they were pulling them in, all bloody, chopped up faces. You couldn't recognize any of them. They were pulling them in. And while he's pulling them in the yard, the guards are pulling them in, he realized what happened. He dismissed all of us. He told us to all go back into our original line. He orders his henchmen to bring down a portable gallows, which holds one person at a time, and we all had to watch and stay in attention while they were hanging them one at a time in front of us. You couldn't tell. I mean, we were not human beings anymore at that point. Imagine afterwards they dismissed us and we all went with our little pots and pans or whatever to get our ration. With what we just went through, and we see 3 men hung. One of them was yelling out the Shema Yisrael. I mean, it was unbelievable to hear that. And here we're going for our food as if nothing ever happened. We're going now back to our barrack. For months, I couldn't lay on my back. I always had to lay on my stomach. But I healed up. Everything.
But
when you're young.
You saved your uncle from.
But I saved my uncle. So one night, we hear a lot of cannon fire. We heard like the front is closing in. We hear cannons. Oh, this sounds good. We didn't know where the Allies were or what's going on out there. We had no idea, none of it.
We're on.
Okay, so where was I?
That you couldn't sleep.
Yeah, I couldn't sleep for a long time.
Your stomach.
I had to sleep on my stomach. But that night one night, a few days later, we heard cannon fire. That meant the front was closing in close. We had no idea about the Allies or who is fighting where. We had no news or anything. We never heard anything. That morning, instead of going to work, they lined us up and they gave us some provisions, and they said we're going to evacuate the camp. That camp was called Durnhau. We're going to evacuate Durnhau. Durnhau. I'm not sure, all right? I'm not sure the exact spelling.
Well, that helps.
I had never seen it in writing. I just remember they called it Durnhau. And we're to be marched out of there.
What time of year was this?
That was probably February or March.
Cold.
It was still cold, snow on the ground, yeah. February or March. Probably February.
Okay.
And my uncle was already in the kitchen. So the only ones is my cousin and I, and they started to march us out of the camp, and we never saw our uncle again. I don't know what happened to him. He never survived the war. What they did with the kitchen staff, I don't know. I have no idea. But I can imagine. All right? I have a pretty good idea of what they do with people who they have no more use for. All right? So here I am with this son, my cousin, and we're being marched. We're marching and marching 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, a week.
A death march.
What?
Like a death march.
That was called the Death March.
Right.
Why was it called the Death March? Is because if you couldn't keep up with the pace, they would simply shoot you. And you could hear pops shooting all the time, because a lot of people just couldn't take it anymore. They just couldn't keep up. So my cousin got very weak. He was older than I. He was almost 20, I think, at the time. He was older than I am, but he got so weak that he begged me. He says, "Ben, let me sit down in the snow." All he had to do is sit down, we all pass him up, and then they'll shoot him. He says, "Take me out of the misery. I can't take this anymore." I wouldn't hear of it. I says, "No. As long as I'm living, you're going to be living. We're going to either live together or die together. We're going together. We're not giving up. The fact that the front is closing in, that tells us something is getting closer to possible liberation or something." I dragged them along in another week like this. This was 2-week march. Finally, we wind up in a place called Buchenwald. Buchenwald was a very notorious concentration camp. We didn't know what it was. We arrived in Buchenwald, and in the center of the yard, their beautiful yard, they lined us up, they counted everybody, and they told us to go into this barrack. You can shower there, take a shower, you're going to be fed, and you're going to get fresh, clean clothes, because we were all filthy. Imagine 2 weeks of that. Fresh, clean clothes. But tomorrow morning, at exactly 8 a.m., you have to be back here on the same place, because we're evacuating this camp also. We have to march out of here. Well, which is what we did. We went in, we changed our clothes, we washed up, we ate a little bit, we came out. Next morning, they marched us out again, and they marched us about a couple kilometers. We got to a siding. Again, there are cattle cars lined up, and they divide us 80 per cattle car. We're going to go someplace, all right? Well, we figured anything is better than walking anymore, because we just couldn't, our feet couldn't take it anymore. But I tell my cousin, "I'll help you get in, be sure you go to the wall in the back so we can rest our backs on the wall rather than being in the middle among all the people.
Sure.
And because the last time I was in a cattle car, I was in the middle, and I knew the problem. He says, go to the wall. And I pushed him in, he went to the wall, and I followed him, and I was right next to him on the wall. We had a place to rest our shoulder. Suddenly the doors close up, and about a half hour later they open again. This time they threw in 80 breads. A bread for each person. Now if you could picture this, the people next to the door were grabbing 3 or 4 breads. And since I was at the end there by the wall, I had nothing. Now I knew I had to have a bread. Now I felt bad. I told my cousin to get there. We were going to starve. So I started to climb over the sitting bodies or the heads of these people to get to the door to reach a bread or two. While I'm climbing, I felt a stab. Someone had a pocket knife and he just stabbed me. I felt it, but I couldn't let go. I had to go get a bread. So I'm climbing, and finally I got a hold of one bread, and I put it under my jacket, and I come back to my cousin. He says, Ben, what happened to you? Blood all over the place. I didn't see what happened, but I put my finger here, and it went right through my tongue. A big gash there. It went right through the tongue. Now this in itself was a miracle. I took a piece of my trousers, because a piece of cloth, and I made a tourniquet with all the schmutz and all the filth, not to get an infection. It was meant it was meant for me to live.
Yeah.
I still have the mark here, but right now it's over my chin bone. You see it right here.
Yeah.
Before it was on my throat because I was very skinny. Now that I filled up a little, it's right over my chin bone. Right here is a mark. Anyway, we are going someplace. I have no idea how long it's going to be. We only have one breath between us. I had enough foresight and enough discipline where I took the size of a half an egg bread and I gave it to my cousin, and the same size to me per day. And I was hiding the rest. Now, we were now going for weeks, no food and no water. Occasionally, the guards would fill up the buckets with snow, so we can grab a little snow in my mouth or our mouth or something. There was nothing. And people were dying left and right, dying all over. And there was cannibalism going on, because some of those people who had 3 or 4 breads, they had no water to digest it with, they died.
Okay.
However, nobody knew that I had a piece of bread, because I had to do this at nighttime only, because if they knew, they would tear me apart in pieces to get to the bread. So and it took about almost 2 weeks that bread lasted. Now if you can picture hunger, so hungry that your eyes pop out, you would eat anything and have bread here and have enough willpower not to touch it. And I think that's what saved our lives.
Yeah.
Because when nobody else had anything, they ate it all up, and I had it for a couple of weeks. It made a difference. Anyway, for 4 weeks we were being shuttled back and forth, because apparently the front was closing in different places. In some places the tracks were bombed out, and all of a sudden we were in Czechoslovakia. All of a sudden we don't know where we're going. The guards didn't even know. These were not SS, they were Wehrmacht, regular soldiers. And they didn't even know where they are or what's going to happen with us. They just followed orders. After about approximately 4 weeks, we lost track of time. I don't know exactly, 4 weeks or short a little bit. We arrived at a place called Dachau. Dachau was a well-known concentration camp. Now, when the train arrived into Dachau, loudspeakers came on and they said that everyone who can walk, to walk out of the train, cross the tracks into the gate there, into the camp. There were at least 2,000 going in. I don't think there was 7 or 8 of us walking out of that train. They were all dead. Everybody was dead. Imagine 3-4 weeks with dead people without food, and the stench, the smell. I don't have to even tell you what it was like. But we, my cousin and I, were so skinny that you can put your fingers around our thighs like this, just a stick, like a stick. We weighed, I weighed about 60 or 65 pounds. Nothing but a skeleton, just bone, with eyes popping out, still moving. I was still able to move. And both of us were holding on to each other, and we crossed this thing. And when we came across this track, the first thing we saw in front of our eyes was a mountain of dead bodies, skeletons, piled up like cords of wood, piled up. Later, I found out that that was next to the crematorium, and the Germans ran out of coal, so they couldn't burn those bodies. So they were piling them up and piling them up. Maybe that's why they didn't kill us right away, figuring they have enough dead bodies there, we're going to die anyway. So they put us in this barrack right next to the crematorium. There was a barrack. They didn't even bother to give us a bunk on the floor, but they gave us some water. There was a person in charge of the barrack, gave us water and a little soup later on, and some provisions. And we just laid on the floor. We couldn't even sit anymore because there was nothing to sit on, nothing but bone. So we were just laying like this. When suddenly, after 3 days of this, we hear Befreiung, Befreiung, Yiddish, liberation, liberation, in different languages, liberation in German and Polish and Hungarian. What is going on? Well, I knew what Befreiung meant, so I take my cousin by his hand, we both stand up with all our last ounce of power. We stood up and we walk out into the yard. What we saw, I couldn't believe. These American GIs, they came in, they got sick to their stomach what they've seen. All those dead bodies, the emaciated walking dead like us. And they got so angry, how is this possible? They didn't know what to expect. When they liberated Dachau, they didn't know that was the camp. They were just on their way to Munich, liberate Germany. It was near the end of the war. They came across Dachau accidentally. But when they saw what happened, and they I'm in the yard with my cousin, I see this GI, American GI, walking up the step ladder, that iron ladder to go into the guard tower on top. There was still a German sitting with his machine gun. He goes up from behind, he grabs this German, he was so disgusted, he tossed him right into the camp where all the inmates tore him apart into pieces. They just couldn't stomach what they have just seen. And 2 American soldiers walk up to me and to my cousin, and they hand me a 2-pound can of Spam. They found it in the German warehouses. They opened up the top. Now, we made a big mistake because we were in no condition to eat that rich food, cold Spam. So, but we did make a mistake. We ate a little bit of it, and both of us came down with dysentery. Now, a lot of people did come down with dysentery. Many of these weak ones died. My cousin in my arm, the night after liberation, dies in my hands from dysentery. After all of this, he's dying. I said, Isaac, he's dead. And they come to pick him up. I wouldn't let them. I said, can I go with you? So I wanted to go along with where they're going to take him. So as I stand up, I keep falling down. I couldn't. My knees gave under me, and I just couldn't get up. They took him away. I'm laying there, and I'll never forget this. A priest walks up to me. Apparently he came in with the French troops of a French group of doctors and nuns and some priests. And they came in and they opened up a field hospital in Dachau, right? And after they've seen what's going on. So he came up and picked me up, he put me on his shoulder, he's taking me in the infirmary, to the hospital. Then he asked me, he spoke to me in Polish. And he's asked me in Polish, he says, what is your name? I said, Benek, in Polish, Benek. Benek. He says, that's a nice name. He says, Benek, I want to tell you something. You Jewish people paid a very high price for being Jewish. Don't you ever abandon your noble religion. That came from a Jesuit priest. I couldn't believe it, and to date I remember these words. A noble religion. That was unheard of from a
Yes.
Jesuit priest in those days. But he says, don't you ever abandon your noble religion. And he put me into a cot, and he laid me down there. The last thing I remember, they gave me intravenous, and I passed out. I don't know what happened to me afterwards, but I do know this. It wasn't until 3.5 months later that there's a record of me arriving in St. Tertullian, which was in Bavaria, about 30 kilometers from Dachau, a hospital. It was a cloister, a monastery, where the monks gave up one building for the rehabilitation of the survivors from Auschwitz. And when I came to myself, this is where I woke up, in a regular hospital, in a hospital bed, in a nice place. All I can say, we survived. But was there real joy or ecstasy in survival? No. Because we Jewish survivors anyway, had no place to go. We had no more homes, no one out there waiting for us, no one to hug us. We were left to fend for ourselves. When you see those pictures of survivors being liberated in Dachau or in other camps with smiling faces, those are not Jewish pictures. Those are not pictures from Jewish people. The Jewish people were walking dead. They couldn't smile anymore. They were nothing but skeletons, because they intended all the Jews in Dachau were supposed to have been liquidated that day. They were going to kill every Jew in Dachau. But the Americans came in about 3-4 hours too early, so they didn't have a chance to do it. The other prisoners that you see in those photographs are what they call, what do they call them? What do they call those? They're prisoners of war, or political prisoners, that Gentiles They were against the German Nazis, or they were soldiers or whatever. They kept them in Dachau in a separate place completely, and they were treated differently. The Jewish inmates were those skeletons.
Yeah.
They were absolute skeletons. Well, all I can tell you, you got to the point of liberation, but to tell my story after liberation would take another 3 hours, because it's a beautiful story, how I came to America and the things that happened to me, how I became a Zionist, I was going to go to Israel. You have to read my book to understand what became of this concentration camp survivor, this Muslim who was liberated in Dachau, Ben Lesser.
Yes.
If you read my book, you will be surprised. You will be surprised to learn. And I think the story after liberation is even more interesting and has more meaning than before liberation. And I urge all of you to read it. I don't have a name for the book yet, but check my website. It's the Zachor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation website. Just Google Ben Lesser. If you Google me, it'll lead you to the website. And when the book comes out with the right name on it, it will be there. Right now, the only book there is my sister's book that I put in because it's also worthwhile reading. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ben.